that you really didn't. A lot of you didn't miss it. You were satisfied with other things. You weren't consumed with longing for the things you didn't have. And you were a little surprised that you were okay with that. That it's almost a sort of way of saying you had the spiritual chops to get through it. To get through it, they were already there. You can't summon them in the instant. But I thought it was very interesting that your life changed and it was okay and you did enjoy it, and all the things you thought were essential you still really loved, but you realized that there were a lot of other ways to have a really full life. And I just thought that was really
I was
great.
lucky because I've already done so many things in my life. I feel sorry for my children and grandchildren because they won't be able to do as much.
All right.
But I saw a cartoon. I'm catching up on old New Yorkers, and there was a great cartoon this week from late July, early August, of a couple. He's sitting with a pad of paper, and she walks into the room, and the caption is, "I'm making a list of all the people I've learned I can do without."
It is so
True.
Well, okay, Michael, start.
Okay,
Okay.
Michael, tell us about your famous encounter.
Well, the person that I'm going to introduce you to today is not himself famous, but his family, I'm sure you've heard of. The story takes place in Tours, France, which is just southwest of Paris, about 2.5 hours from Paris. And we both just happened to be students at the Institut de Touraine, which is part of the University of Tours. And we were both students of French, and the student body at Tours, the student body is truly remarkable. It's a wonderful school, and people are there from all over the world. So the classes were peppered with children from many prominent families. They were all there. The British people were there for finishing off their A levels. And they all had a reason to be there. And if they had their certificate from the Institute, it was a guarantee of passing into the next level of preparation that they were expected to accomplish. So I never really knew, I bring that up because I never really knew with whom I was speaking during class breaks or who was sitting next to me on these little class outings. And so you're kind of, it was like a mystery getting to know the people. And gradually I developed a friendship with an American girl. Her name was Mary Louise, we called her Mary Lou, and a young Swedish boy by the name of Michael. And we did a lot of things together. And we just kind of fell together because we all like doing the same thing. So we would be going to concerts together. We'd go to movies together. We'd take short trips, like weekend trips. And I went through, I actually tried to see if I had any pictures, because this was before I was a photographer. And there's a picture of us, if you can see.
I don't know. Can you see anything in there?
Yeah, sure, yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Here we're in Brittany on the Gulf of Morbihan. We're eating a picnic lunch. We would stop at these little bakeries and get these wonderful breads and meats and cheeses and wines. And we were just sitting on the coast having this lunch, and it just reminded me of how much joy this time of life had for me. Life was just so wonderful. And we were on our way to visit the Karnak. I don't know if you've heard of Karnak. It's like Stonehenge, only it's like older than
Isn't it in Egypt?
No.
Isn't it a Johnny Carson character?
I was just gonna say Johnny Carson did it with a
This is in
turban on his
Brittany.
head.
Yeah. So anyway, one day Michael asked me to go to a favorite cafe for coffee, he said that he had something he wanted to tell me and that he needed to ask me something. And I'm curious, of course. And I really, at this time, I knew nothing about anybody, any of these kids. They were just my friends. So we went to, I just had a party. I had an apartment when I was in tour because the family situation didn't work out. So I rented an apartment and moved out by myself. And at that age, I gave a few parties, which I'm sure the landlord wasn't too happy about. But during one of the parties, a couple of Brits were asking me questions about Michael, and I didn't know what they were getting at. And so I just kind of blew them off. And but they wanted to know everything about him, you know, what he liked to do, what we did, blah, 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 blah. So where he was from. So we go to get coffee. And as we were sipping our coffee, we we're just kind of, you know, working our way into a conversation, he began to tell me about his personal life. And I guess I could begin the narrative, his narrative, by saying something like this. Once upon a time, there was a talented and troubled little boy who was born into the royal house of Sweden, and everyone called him Prince Sigvard. He said, so then Michael said, that would be my father. His father was the second son of King Gustav, and his mother was the great granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And so his father became the oldest living descendant of Queen Victoria towards the end of his life. He was a Prince of Sweden until 1934.
That's his father.
That's his father, Sigvard. Now I'm talking about Sigvard. And I'm filling you in because I have to keep this organized because it's so complex. It took me forever to try to understand, and I'm trying to simplify for you. So Sigvard he had 4 siblings, an older brother, then him, and then he had 2 younger daughters, sisters. And actually there were 5, and there was a young boy, there were 5. So in 1934, Sigvard married what they call a private man's daughter. And this was against the wishes of the king. And also the act of succession says that if you marry a private man's daughter, you are going to lose your right of succession. If you lose your right of succession, according to the Royal House of Sweden, you also lose your titles. So Prince Sigvard, this very talented little egocentric boy, lost all of his titles and it became Mr. Sigvard. And he remained that until he received a complimentary noble title through the Royal House of Luxembourg, and that is called the House of Wiesborg. And for some reason, I don't understand this connection still, and I should probably look it up, but Luxembourg and the Royal House of Sweden are united in such a way that the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg can grant titles of nobility to people who have been excluded through the rules of succession from the nobility. So it's a way they keep their noble ranking so they can attend and be invited to royal functionings without being in the direct line of succession. It just sounds like a very contorted way of maintaining your status. So there was so he said after he finished this elaborate explanation, he just sat back and he said so Michael, he said, I am Count Michael Bernadotte of Wiesborg.
Wow.
And then he said, and this is a part, it chokes me up. because it was so, I felt so bad for him. Because he said, many people are curious about my family. And because I'm a member of this family, he said, people are always writing things about us and asking questions, and you'll say something to someone and it comes out in the paper and it's completely different than what happened. And I really understood this paparazzi thing that we have with the British royal family, because here was Michael sitting and asking me to tell, he asked me, basically, he said, please don't share our experiences with anybody, because you never know where it's going to end up and you never know how it's going to be presented. And he said, I consider you a personal friend of mine. And so I said, what could I say? You know, I said, of course. He said, I had no idea, you know, because you do get, then you become very, very protective. And we were best friends, and we did all sorts of silly things until he left. He left in December. I stayed until March, but I found another picture. This is him. This is when we were sailing. One afternoon, we were sailing. Can you see that? Can you try to get that, Jeff, better?
Mhm.
Get it.
No, well, look, there you can see Michael, I don't know. If you
Can you see?
He's
I
sitting there at
can
the,
see.
Yeah.
I see that, and then I went online and I got a picture. The picture of him sitting in the boat is just like this is what he looks like now. I went online and got a picture from the website of the Officeborg, and that's what he looks like in like 1994. And what I find so amazing is that it's just an older Michael. He's maintained his quiet. He's very quiet and patient and charming. Just a lovely, very philosophical. Just I cannot tell you what a wonderful memory this little experience has brought back for me. And I wanted to share that with you. He's not a star, but he's a person related to the King of Sweden. Oh, he's the uncle of the current King of Sweden. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful man, and a star in the history of my life.
Aw.
And a great grandchild of Victoria, right? Great
That's right.
Victoria.
That's right. That's right. Right. Great grandson.
it's a good family connection.
It's
Right. Charlie?
If you want to be related to those guys.
Well,
Yeah,
I was
no.
about to say, unfortunately, there are other branches of that family who we are currently dealing with in the modern world who are,
But
anyway.
I just want to think that after he left tour, we became friends of his that were also friends of mine, stayed around in tour for another 3 or 4 months. And he would write back and he would say, you know, tell us little things of his goings on and what he was doing. And it was really a kind of a gradual tapering off of, you know, friendships over time kind of fade away. But it was a real significant experience. And you know, now that I think about it, probably even more important than that I remember it as now. So he's a super person, nice person. Anyway, so that's it.
Have you been in touch recently?
No, we stopped writing. When I went back to the University of Wisconsin, I began studying with Dr. Germaine Bray on the translation of French. And it was very, very time consuming. And I just stopped writing in general. I was working, and that lasted until I graduated from the from Wisconsin. And then I went to work for Time Magazine. I just lost track of everybody. The only person I kept track of from tour was a person by the name of Garth Behrman. And I stayed in touch with him because his father had a branch of his company that was in Florida. So Garth would come back and forth to the States, and I would hear from him when he was in the States. So
Well, my feeling, because all sorts of people have been getting in touch, we're of an age when, what do you have to lose? And you're so
Oh, you
fond
mean-
of.
Yeah. Oh, my
Do
goodness.
it.
Yeah. No, I mean, we had so many connections. The cigarette lighter that I had was designed by Sigvard. His father, when he left the royal family, became an industrial designer and worked for George,
Jensen.
Jensen.
yes,
Jensen.
and he was famous in his own right. He became this star designer of silver, and the cigarette lighter that I used was designed by his father. He's one of the, and so it would be there were just a lot of synchronicities like that.
You find
And
him.
he was from he lived in Copenhagen, and I think if I were to try to find him now, well, you know what?
You know
I mean,
what?
I
The
would
first
have.
step would be, let's see if he's on Facebook.
You should do it.
I don't think he would be in Facebook.
You never know.
You never know.
I don't think, but you know what? I'm
Start there.
You can Google him.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I'm going to see if there's an address, if he's in Sweden or if he's still in Denmark. His father was in Denmark, but his father's buried in Sweden. So, and they're still considered princes of Sweden, so they're buried in the royal cemetery. So he might be back in Stockholm. I don't know. I will to be
That'd be
continued.
fun.
Right.
Yeah,
I'll try to
Interested,
find it.
we'll
Yeah.
wait for the next chapter. That's a great
Yeah,
story.
I'm
Marco.
gonna-
Shari, I'm appointing
Yes.
you next because you're dealing with royalty.
My second son was born on the 12th of September. And I had problems and couldn't gain any weight during pregnancy. And I had gained 7 pounds and he weighed 6. So after he was born, I could put on all my clothes. I just felt wonderful. Men don't understand that, but women do.
Actually, it's an amazing little bit of weight that you gain. Most women gain at least 20 pounds or 25 pounds when they're pregnant.
But I couldn't because I would go into labor. So anyway, we were invited to an embassy party 3 weeks later. And I put on a black dress that was my skinniest dress and it fit. I felt wonderful. And I put on the jewelry and I did my hair and the makeup and we went to the party. And everybody was coming up to me and saying, "Oh, how's the baby? You look so wonderful." And I'm strutting like the chicken that I thought I was at the time. And I'm walking around and shaking hands with people and kissing on both cheeks, and everybody's coming up to me. And I turned around and there was this beautiful young woman, and I knew her. And I walked up to her and I said, "I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm so glad to see you again." And I put my hand out. And then I turned and I thought, holy shit, I just shook hands with a queen of Greece.
Oh,
And you're never supposed to touch a royal. So as I'm walking away, I turned back to look at her and she winked at me.
Oh,
That's the end of the
Ah.
story.
That's good. You know, she probably turned to her lady waiting and said, "Who the hell was
was
that?"
that?
I don't remember.
But she looked great. You know.
I look
I
wonderful.
don't remember who that is. Tell me.
ah,
Okay, who's next?
I'll do it.
Okay,
Mine is not as wonderful a story as those, I tell you. And it wasn't royalty, but
well, it is. in
this
its
is
own
a
way.
famous person. I'm going to do a little background story, and this comes into a history of the Jews in Chicago. There were a lot of organizations that were put together to do charitable support. And Evelyn Steinberg was a friend of a lot of families on the North Side, and she died young in her late 30s from breast cancer. Her friends, being grief-struck, put together a club called the Evelyn Steinberg Memorial Club. And they made it their mission to raise money to give to cancer research because their beloved friend had died of cancer. And at its height, you have to remember, I was a little kid when all this was going on, but I tried to look a little bit of this up because it's relevant to the famous person that I met. During its height, maybe in the mid to late 50s and 60s, it had about 600 members. In addition, it had very large fundraising things where they would buy out theaters. They had a dinner dance where 1,200 people would attend. There was an article from the Sentinel in April of 1956 in which there was a ceremony in which they presented now, who did they give their money to? They gave their money to Mount Sinai Cancer Foundation, not Mount Sinai in New York. This is Mount Sinai in Chicago, because in those days, that was a very big hospital, and they had a research institute, and a lot of the Jewish charities in Chicago, like the one that my parents belonged to, which was the Evelyn Steinberg Memorial Club, was supported. To give you an idea of the kind of money they raised on their little functions, in 1956, they had given them a total of $100,000. That money in today's money would be over $1 million. So that one club was able to get that kind of money, and sometimes it was $120,000 or $150,000. Anyway, as it turns out through my research, in 1959, my mother was president of that organization. And as part of their organized fundraisers, they had they bought out the opening night of a new play that was being presented at the Edgewater Beach Hotel Summer
Oh,
Theater.
God, yes.
Okay. So those of us who are from Chicago and of a certain age remember the Edgewater Beach Hotel quite fondly. And there was a summer theater, and we attended the opening night, and I'll give you the date in a minute. And after the performance, because we were the children and she was the president, she went backstage and met the star of the show, and we had our photos taken and spent some time with him. And I will show you the picture. So this is myself, my mother, my sister on the afternoon of July 20th, 1959. And my sister and I were 13 years old then, because I was born in 46. And see if it's clear enough for you to see who the famous person is in the middle. Groucho Marx.
Oh, you are so
Hold it up. Let him see how you looked when you were 13.
That's so cute.
How much closer can I get,
Yeah.
Michael?
That's good.
Hair. He had hair.
And that's my sister and my mother.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
that's so nice. That's
And
a sweet photo.
Yeah.
And Groucho was, I'll tell you two short little anecdotes here. We were sitting literally in the front row. And the play's name was Time for Elizabeth, which has fortunately sunk into the obscurity for which it deserved. And the play had been written by Groucho and somebody else. And I'm sitting there, and he said there was a line in which to use the word eunuch. I didn't know what that meant. And I turned to my father, who was sitting next to me, and I said, "What does the word eunuch mean?" Groucho heard me from the stage and then ad-libbed a line. And it went something like, if you don't know what a eunuch is sort of a man, but there's some fundamental alteration. That's all he said. And of course, the audience thought that was funny. By the way, the audience, what? I'm sorry. The
no,
audience
you
thought-
blushed.
Yeah, no, I didn't blush because I still didn't know what a eunuch was. What alteration is he talking about? But
His suit coat.
yeah, but my father explained to me later. But everything he said, put me into gales of laughter. All right, so there we had that photograph, and who you don't see was the photographer there and the woman who was in charge of the photography or the publicity for the organization. And she said to him, "Mr. Marx, can you take off your hat for the next photo?" There are several photos. I just picked this one. And he said to her, he looked at her and said in a really nasty voice, I'll take my hat off if you take off your dress.
Woo.
Which, by the way, I thought was very funny. And I went into gales of laughter hearing that, but no one else thought it
No
was
one
funny.
else would think it.
My mother certainly didn't laugh, nor did this lady. So anyway, that's my brush with Groucho Marx,
With a celebrity.
with the great star that he was even in those days at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, summer stock, which is ancient history.
1959.
But it's actually interesting. You
1959.
might want to know. I actually went online just a few minutes ago before this to see if I could figure out when this was and what the play was. And the listing of the plays and their major stars are on the internet.
Oh, fun.
Anyway, that's my story.
Okay, I think I'll go next. I've got three. One, I didn't know my cousin Peter, who just passed away, was as famous as he is among nuclear physicists. So I went online and read his Wikipedia. Jesus Christ, he was just always cousin Pete, and we discussed photography and all sorts of things. So it was fun finding out in retrospect. My two famous people, when I was 13 years old, my dad was on a USIA, United States, whatever, board for kind of getting the American way to other countries through books. And the head of it was a Sandy Marlowe. And in August, we're invited to DC. You can imagine how comfortable that was pre-air conditioning. But my hostess was at the head of the table, and to her right is Edward R. Murrow. And to his right is me. And, you know, I take a few breaths, and I was always told, ask the person questions, show an interest. So my hero, who I was in awe of, I ask a question. He devotes the rest of the evening to me as if I was the most important person in the world. Dad is sitting across from me, and when Murrow turns to his hostess, Dad goes, "What did you ask?" I said, "I don't remember." You know, I was so stunned because that's what he was famous for in his TV shows, where he was interviewing the famous. But I was hardly famous, but he treated me as if I was. And when he passed away, I just bawled because I knew his whole history by then. And he was my only authentic hero. The other one was Christopher Plummer. And I had seen so many movies and plays with him. And Jerry Arpino used to take me to Kennedy Center Honors. That year, we're seated. And who am I seated next to at the White House? But Plummer. Now I've got to come up with a question. And I asked him about The Insider, which was about 60 Minutes and Mike Wallace. I said, "How'd you ever get that past the lawyers?" He said, "Because it was true." Anyway, charming man. Fast forward, I'm in, and this is a three-part, I'll keep them short. I'm in Africa at a table at one of the lodges, and people are talking about, I believe, Christopher Plummer. And I said, "I don't mean to be a name dropper, but isn't he charming?" And they say, "How do you know Chris the plumber?" This was the person who does the plumbing at the various lodge um, toilets. And I go to my next place, and there's Christopher the plumber, complete with butt cheek. So that was kind of fun. And I got to talk to Plummer the next time I was at Kennedy Center Honors. And I'm telling this story to another person with Plummer present. And there's an utter look of confusion about who is this woman and what's this story. And I get to the end and he bursts out laughing. So, those are my two famous people.
I have a whole
It's cute.
Okay?
Yep. I went to tea at William Kentridge's house in Johannesburg, the artist. My father was
Kentridge.
in the art
Wait,
world.
I didn't hear. To who?
William Kentridge,
Okay.
African artist. And he was working on the nose, by Stravinsky, that the Metropolitan Opera was putting on. And I expressed some interest in that. And he said, "Oh, would you like to see what I'm working on?" And down from his house through the garden, he had a studio, and he took me down there and showed me all the maquettes and all the Russian things studying, and it was really amazing. And then I needed to go to the loo, and so he had a loo in his, what is it called, his studio. And so I went in there, and walking in the door, out of the window is this marvelous foresty view. And so when I came out, I said to him, "You need to put a mirror on the back of your door so that when you're on the loo, you can see the." He loved it. I think he probably did it. He seemed very keen. Anyway, then I knew Pavarotti pretty well because I was at the health spa with him in Italy, not with him, but when he was there. And I met him many times after that at the Three Tenors concert dinner and all that. So that was one, and the other boys from the Three Tenors.
God.
Through all of this, my first music friend was Zubin Mehta, but through all of that, Zubin introduced me to a friend of his that I started dating and dumped immediately. And then having met famous musician types, then I dumped him and I started dating the marketing director.
Listen, I'm in a Zoom meeting. May I call you back?
I went to Cecilia Bartoli's home in Rome and rode on the back of her Vespa. I had to get off and walk up the hill because the two of us were too fat to get up the hill on the little motorbike. And I sat in on recording sessions with Schulte.
Wow.
Sorts of on and on and on. So those are my stories.
Fabulous.
Well, I know Vicky Oberoi very well, but is he famous? Does he qualify?
Indian group, he might qualify.
Yes, yes.
Like his hotels.
Pretty
So
nice.
do I.
Yeah, I've been to dinner at his home, and they know me when I call there. His valet says, "Oh, hello, hold on." Nice.
I just know her.
So yeah. And once I was dancing with my late dance partner at the Lyric Opera, one of the events they had there. We were just dancing off on the side of the foyer, and there was a man leaning against the pillar like this, watching us. And the music stopped, and we stopped right opposite him, and it was René Pape. And I said, "Thank you for singing to us tonight." He'd sung for that event, and he said, "No, thank you for dancing for me."
Whoa.
Very chic.
Whoa.
Lick.
Anyway,
What were you wearing?
I can't remember. Oh, I did. Yeah.
Well, I can
Okay.
share a story if you like. I've worked with lots and lots of famous people. I know lots of famous people. But Sherry's story reminded me of one I forgot. And she's so famous, I had to look her up on the internet so you got her name right. But this happened to me when I was living in London. And I was working for Shaka Khan at the time. I worked for Shaka Khan for several years. And I was with my assistant, Nick Alguire, and this woman walks down the street with red hair and very striking woman. And I'm like, Nick, I know that woman. I know that woman. And we're in Covent Garden, and she comes down, and I go outside and say, excuse me, I'm sure I know you. I'm working for Shaka Khan now, and we were just in the theater. Have we worked in the theater together? Is that how I know you? And she looked at me in the eye and she said, no, I introduced myself and I said, I'm Joseph Houseel and I work for Shaka Khan. And do I know you from working in the theater here? And she looked at me and said, no, I'm sure you don't know me from the theater, but it's a pleasure meeting you, Joseph Houseel. And I'd say if you're in London and working for Shaka Khan, then life is good. And so she walks down the way. And I'm like, God, Nick, I know that woman. So later, a couple days later, Nick, my assistant, comes running up to me. We're in the airport and he points to the television, says, Joseph, there's that woman you were talking to the other day, your friend. And I'm like, oh my God, it was Julia Gillard, the Prime Minister of Australia. Okay, you remember her? Okay. And I was like, I know I did theater with her. But she was such a good politician. She remembered my name. No, Joseph Houseel, but I think if you do that, she was really impressive. And she only said that one thing. But anyway, that was my brush with the Prime Minister of Australia. Yeah, thought we did theater together, but I guess not.
Betty?
Yeah.
Well, having lived in and around Los Angeles for so long, I've had brushes with a lot of famous people just because everyone sort of collects star sightings there. I've got a few very short little stories. One is that I was in a restaurant the last day this restaurant was open, and people who had frequented it often were all there. And I'm trying to think of the name of it again. I can't remember. But I'm walking to the ladies' room and a woman is walking out and I'm thinking, she looks familiar, not unlike Joseph's experience of seeing someone you think you know. And she saw the recognition in my face and smiled at me and I smiled at her. And then I went into the bathroom and went, oh my God, that was Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh,
And she was just so gracious about smiling at me, like, because she saw the recognition. And she was with her husband, Christopher Guest, who's one of the funniest men on the planet. If you've ever seen
yes.
Waiting for Guffman. And
Yes.
Richard wanted to get up and go and tell him, but everyone around said, no, you don't go up to Christopher Guest. He's shy. He doesn't like to be addressed. So that was my Jamie Lee Curtis. The other was on a more spiritual level. When the Tibetan Resettlement Project was going on here in Chicago, one of the events that happened was that the Dalai Lama came to visit. And there was we were supportive of this project. And so we got invited to a very small audience with the Dalai Lama. And I can't tell you just how much his spirit filled the room. There were maybe 24 people in this small hall. And I mean, I start to shake when I think about it, just being in the presence of that kind of intense spirituality. And just a short story about the Dalai Lama, when they had the revival of the Parliament of World Religions that had happened in 1893 here. In 1993, they had a revival of it here in Chicago, and he was one of the speakers. And I was at the talk, and I was listening that people who were talking about peace and spirituality and all the other words that go along with that were saying, we abhor violence, we disdain this, when he spoke, he never used a violent word to talk about how he promoted peace and love and whatever, the rest of his message. And it was remarkable how he could give a whole talk and not use a single violently negative word in the whole thing. So that was those are two, but I've got two other short ones. One is Richard and I were in London with some friends many years ago, and we saw a play called The Farmer's Wife. And maybe we saw it on a Tuesday night, let's just say Tuesday night. And it was terrific. And Albert Finney was in it, and the rest of the cast, I don't remember. The next night we went to some very deadly George Bernard Shaw play, absolutely deadly. It was probably Man and Superman or something like that, through which I had completely fallen asleep. The next night we were at something and we're coming out of the theater, and it had a staircase that split before you got to the lobby. So you could go to the left or the right. And I went in one direction, and there's Albert Finney standing next to me, who had been in the audience for this performance on the Thursday night now. And I looked at him, I said, "You were marvelous last night." And he looked at me. I was younger and cuter then. He looked at me, he said, "Last night?" I said, "Yeah, in The Farmer's Wife." He said, "Oh, that was Tuesday night. If it had been last night and I was wonderful, I certainly would have remembered you." And he gave me this big hug. He was adorable. And then my last one was with the artist Francesco Clemente, about whom I wrote my master's thesis. And I chose, when I was writing, to not meet him in person. He had been interviewed so many times and was so eminently quotable that I didn't want his personality to get in the way of what I had to say. But after I wrote it, I contacted him and went to visit him. And it was just before his big retrospective at the Guggenheim. And he invited me to his studio. He made tea. On his wall was a whole map of the Guggenheim. He was very much a control freak, with every single image that was going to be where it was on the wall. And we spent hours just talking about his experience of arriving in India. And we talked about that for a long time. And then afterwards, Richard was waiting for me in a coffee shop right downstairs. And I went down, I said, "Don't talk. I have to write down everything that he said," because I wasn't taking notes while I was talking to him. It was just a casual meeting. So jump ahead maybe an hour or two. Richard and I go to this very elegant little Japanese restaurant for lunch. And in walks Francesco with these two fabulous looking women. They look like fashion models. And I introduced him to Richard, and all Richard could say to me, he says, "I don't even want to imagine what the rest of his afternoon is going to be."
I'll be right back.
So those are my little brushes with fame, if not celebrity.
Well, they're pretty good.
I have small ones, very small. So I used to go to the Telluride Film Festival, and in between movies, you go to the small shops. So I went to one, and there was a woman standing next to me, and as I am, "Oh, you look like Meg Whitman." She looks at me and goes, "I am Meg Whitman." And then, oh. So then I was like, "Oh," and I just went back shopping. I don't know what to say to that, And then the other picture, the only not celebrity, and it wasn't, you had an epiphany with the one you met, Betty. I was too stupid, and I haven't changed much since then. My father, I grew up in Calcutta, India, and my father was an active Rotarian. So every time we used to go to the Rotary Club of Calcutta, Southwest Calcutta. And there used to be this old woman who used to come there. She used to come all the time. She was very, to me, she was like this old woman. It's like, okay, she always comes. Why does she come? I didn't know. Luckily, my mother kept a picture. So that was such a twit. Do you see her?
There's a glare.
Oh, Mother Teresa.
Yeah, that was the woman who used to come to Rotary Club all the time. And if you look at the picture, that idiot on this side staring at the guy, I didn't know who she was. And I was probably thinking, why am I taking this picture of this old woman? And so I was staring at this guy. And that's Mother Teresa, and our driver there, and my sister. And that is the only thing that I can tell. And she used to come all the time. I cannot tell you a single story because I never paid attention, because she was very often there.
She probably couldn't get a good meal at her convent. Needed to go to the Rotarian.
Probably.
I've heard
Where
that
she didn't have to practice abstinence.
I've heard that she was very, very strict. She was very, very.
I heard that she was cruel, actually.
Yeah, she was really, yeah.
I heard a
Really?
horrible story about her, about a woman, a Catholic woman I know, had a friend who went and as a volunteer there, and she was starting to give an orphan baby who was illegitimate a bottle, and Mother Teresa said, no, he should not be, he's illegitimate, and therefore he's not allowed the comfort of a nipple. You have to spoon his milk into his mouth.
Oh,
Horrible.
I don't hold, sorry, it's a nice picture.
I didn't know who she was, but that's okay.
But
Perfectly.
I don't hold Mother Teresa in high regard.
I want to share a couple of encounters I've had. These little tidbits remind me. Jack and I were having lunch at Cafe Luxembourg in New York, and Katie Holmes was sat down at the table right behind us, and I dropped my napkin, and I mean I wasn't, I knew she was there, but I didn't care because we see people like that all the time at Luxembourg. But I went down and I picked up my napkin, I looked up, and she was looking right at me, and she smiled the smile of heaven. She's so sweet. And I looked at her and I smiled back at her. I said, with a smile like that, you don't need any makeup. And she just started laughing. And it was like one of the nicest moments,
Nice.
you know? And then another time we're at the Thanksgiving Day parade, and it ends down by Macy's main store at 34th Street. So everyone is breaking up, and so people are going every which way. It's really chaotic, and there's a high curb, and there was this woman and her daughter and a baby, and I just leaned down and I just kind of helped because it was awkward. I just helped them up with a carriage that the baby was in, and then I looked up, and my hand went out like I was going to shake her hand. I had no idea who she was. And I looked at her, and she smiled, and I smiled at her, and I said, "You look just like Faye Dunaway." And she took my hand and grabbed it. You know, she held it like it says, "More people say that to me." And then she winked, and we just went on our way. And it was Faye Dunaway.
Oh,
And that's how she had. I thought that was so
it's
cool.
brilliant.
It was
It's-
brilliant. Yeah. So those are two kind of brushes we've had with celebrities in New York.
What's the other one?
Katie Holmes.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Actually, it was very interesting. We go to Cafe Luxembourg a lot when we're in New York because it's around the corner from where we have our apartment. And there are a lot of there are a lot of celebrities who live on the Upper West Side who go there as well.
Yeah.
And so, and we have a favorite table before the COVID thing stopped.
Table
Indoor dining, we had a favorite table that we like to go to, and they have it in their computer system, and because we're regular customers, and so they often will seat us there if they can. Anyway, and it's in a corner, and often
Well,
we see
it
we
can be
often
very
see-
private.
We often see celebrities right around us. I mean, Steve Martin
Martin.
was sitting at a table right next to us, and then one day, right across from us in the corner at a large table was Steven Spielberg.
This
And-
was before, and we heard the conversation on West Side Story, the remake of West Side Story, before it was even in the news.
Because he was there with cast members
was
and
there with
producers talking about the makeover production.
The Maria, the 17-year-old girl was there.
And
She
we-
had just flown in, and it was her introductory lunch to the.
So we were sitting there listening and all that. So when we left, I said to the hostess, I said, you know, when we're here, we're often seated near these celebrities. She says, I do that on purpose. I said, why? Because I know you won't bother them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of Bernadette Peters.
Yeah.
I can't even remember everybody.
What is that famous black actor? that lives in our
James
building?
Earl Jones.
Well,
James
it.
Earl Jones.
Oh.
James Earl Jones lives in our building. We have never seen him, ever.
Yeah, they're so protective of his
I
privacy.
mean, and there are only 100 apartments in the building, and some of them are combined apartments. We've never seen him. Anyway,
Anyway, but I thought the Faye Dunaway was a classic,
I love it.
isn't it? Yeah.
Penelope?
Well, I'm sitting here feeling very dull.
Oh,
I have one encounter which I remembered very well at the time, and one secondhand one from my father. The one encounter was on the Independence headed to Europe, and I shared an elevator. I was 14. I shared an elevator with Mel Ferrer, Audrey Hepburn.
Oh,
Wait. What made an impression on me was that his daughter wore the very same Lance of Salzburg sundress that I had.
oh.
That was really important. Exactly the same dress, right? The other story is my father's story, not mine. But he was my father was a sometime actor, an equity member, and there was a period when he was also in Chicago productions. He also did Summer Stock in Nantucket. The Chicago production that I remember him talking about was Inherit the Wind with Melvyn Douglas. You know, that's my famous person, secondhand. And he said that he was on stage with Mr. Douglas, and there was a scene in which someone was supposed to come on stage and say something to them and then run off stage. Well, in this case, he came on stage and ran off stage without saying anything to them, which he was supposed to do in another act, but not this one. So Melvyn Douglas and my father made some kind of small talk until the stage manager realized what had happened and fixed it. But afterwards, my father said he went up to him and said, Mr. Douglas, that was just fine. That was wonderful. But tell me, what do you do if you are on stage alone and that happens? My boy, there is just one thing to do. Go down stage center and begin to pick your nose. They will be spellbound. So that is the only secondhand famous person story. I've led a very sheltered life.
There's a marvelous story that was in a book, and I forget, maybe it was Slazak, whose father was a famous opera singer.
Very famous opera singer.
Okay, I've got it right. And somehow the stagehand, they're doing Lohengrin, and the stagehand lets the swan go before Slazak can get in it. And he looks at the stagehand and says, "What time's the next swan?"
He was Leo Slazak, that's his first name, Leo, was the big star of the Vienna Opera Company from around 1900 till into the 1930s. He was the star tenor. And the thing about him is that he had a razor sharp wit. He has a razor,
obviously,
and he actually wrote some reminiscences and books later on, that after the war, because he was during the war he couldn't do this, but that were well received because they were very, very humorous. Of course, there's that title that Frances Alda, the soprano, wrote of her autobiography, and it was called "When Men, Women, and Tenors."
Oh. So who was the soprano who was such a bitch that when she was in Tosca?
Maria?
Kill herself. The other person had to kill themselves.
No, and she jumped off the parapet. The stagehands had put a trampoline on the other side, so she.
No, it wasn't Callas. I can tell you, because Callas was never a bitch.
The mezzo, anyway.
Not in rehearsals or at performances. She was an extremely hardworking musician. In fact, Joan Sutherland, who was at Callas's debut, I don't know if you know the opera Norma, but there's a very tiny role of the Norma's maid called Clotilda. And when Collis made her Covent Garden debut, Sutherland sang that small role because at that time it was another 10 years before Sutherland came into her prime and was the big international star. She said she had written in a book that she had never met a more hardworking singer than Collis. In fact, she would not, she already said to her husband of the future, don't expect me to do what that woman was doing with rehearsals, because she would keep them busy almost to midnight, day after day, trying to get things right. And she said, that isn't the way I can work. This is really beyond reason. And so she was never that temperamental in performance. Now her private life or what happened outside the theater is a different story. And of course,
I love the play Masterclass about her.
Yes.
And
you know what?
What? Oh, I was
Oh,
just going to
I'm
say that
sorry,
one
I
line
interrupted.
has come into our language. We always say, you have to have a look. You have to have a look.
But you know what bothers is, see, the reason I hate that play, and I understand it's theater. See, I have a hard time when plays are about living people or recently deceased or historical, like Amadeus, for example, or the Collis play. This isn't her masterpiece. That isn't the person. That is That is a incredible theatrical
Right.
character. But if you listen to her master classes, which are available online, okay, because she did do master classes at Juilliard, from which this is taken, that person on the stage and that person in the real master classes are not connected. And what bothers me, always bothers me about this, as like Amadeus, is that people will go to the wonderful movie, or they'll go to a revival on stage, or they'll see the wonderful movie of Masterclass, or they'll go to a revival, and they will walk out of the theater thinking that they know that character, and that isn't her.
Well,
And
it's interesting you say this, because I've had a similar, I'm not an opera buff the way many of you are here, so it was fine for me as theater. But I'm having the same argument with a lot of people who are going to the immersive Van Gogh and thinking they've seen Van Gogh paintings.
Oh,
no, of course not.
no.
Drives me bloody crazy.
Different experience.
I know.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, I was there, I saw Van Gogh. I said, well, have you ever seen a real painting? You know?
What really bothers me about the master class though is Terrence McNally knew better.
Yeah.
And I think he really
Because he was a
exploited.
big fan of
He was a
hers.
big fan of hers, and he should have been more authentic. I think he was he changed things for the drama, the effect.
Now, that said,
Which-
I would have killed to have gone to the first production in New York. Not so much for Zoe Caldwell, who obviously would have been fantastic,
Oh my God.
but I would have loved to have heard Audra McDonald sing Lady Macbeth and a few of the other things that she would have done as the Black student, because I think her voice is spectacular. She could have had an opera career had she wanted it, instead of what she did. And I'm not demeaning her career, because it's a
She's
great
had a
career.
great career.
And but she has a gorgeous voice. We saw her in Ain't Misbehaving, or is that Shuffle Along, near the end of her performance, because she was pregnant.
Oh my God, that's a funny story. She was singing. She's got this fabulous voice, and she's got the personality that fills up the theater, right? So then they're shuffling along. They're doing these skits, and she's got to dance, and she's 9.5 months pregnant.
9.5.
She takes the baby like this, right? And she walks a couple of steps. She stops. She turns around and she winks at the audience. It broke everybody up. She was so personality plus.
But
It's so
what for
wonderful.
me was
She's
telling
great.
during that performance was that the other singers were very good by Broadway standards. They had
yeah.
excellent voices and delivery. But when she sang, it was an entirely different dimension. I mean, there wasn't even,
No.
in fact, there was one scene in a sequence in which she is coaching another performer, a singer in the play, as part of the play, and to try to help her with her delivery and whatever. And she's singing the same music as the other soprano. I would have run in the opposite direction if that had been me who had been standing next to her, because
It's so much better.
the contrast was painful.
It's so
Again,
obvious. It
to
was so
me,
obvious.
sitting there as someone who likes singing, but she's wonderful. I would have loved to have seen that first run, because she was in that, and that was part of her, the break in her career. But she could have been an opera singer if she had wanted to, but I think she made the best choices for herself, and certainly her fame we saw her in a concert at singing
Carnegie Hall.
doing singing from the Great American Songbook.
Songbook.
She was wonderful.
It's wonderful.
Is wonderful, actually.
So before we knew all of you, for years, Richard and I used to have before we went to California every winter, we used to have a party in February to help us get through winter. And it was called Oysters and Love Songs. And it was always whatever Sunday was closest to Valentine's Day. And we hired a piano player who was only allowed to play songs from the Great American Songbook. We hired an oyster shucker. We got boxes and boxes of oysters from, they were probably New Orleans at the time, and served nothing but champagne and oysters all afternoon on a Sunday afternoon. And I'm sorry that we don't do it anymore, but everything has its run. We must have had about 15 of those over the years. It started with one December, we looked at each other, how are we going to get through winter? Well, in January, we've got this, and in March, we got that. Well, what are we going to do in February? I said, well, it's Valentine's Day. Let's have a party. And we just went from there. And we had one, I think the first one was like 1975, and we must have had 15 of them after that.
Mhm.
We had the same piano player every year, a guy who had, we got him from the Musicians Union in Chicago. His name was Bert Rose. Bert Rose had an orchestra that played weddings and bar mitzvahs, but he did private gigs as a piano player. And he was this great guy. He knew every song. Someone would just say, do you know what? And people started to sing along with him. And he would say, what key do you want it in? And he would just, he could do it. We have a baby grand piano, and it was always just great fun. But when you said the Great American Songbook, it made me think of that.
Well,
Sorry we didn't know you then. You all would have been there.
I have one more sweetie. I was in my 20s. We were staying at the Plaza in New York. We were there on business, and well, my husband's business. And we went to the Oak Bar for dinner. And we sat down along the banquette, and there was a banquette in front of us at the, across the aisle. And a very pretty woman who said, good evening. And I said, good evening. And my husband, who was a stargazer, just about fell off the edge of the banquette. It was Jackie Kennedy.
Oh, now you reminded me
we
of
have
another
a
story.
No,
I
I was
story. So now we're going back years, and
This is really
I was
pulling him
in-
out of the haymow.
Yeah, I was I was in New York City. You weren't with me.
No, you're with Larry.
I had a friend who lived in New York, and this is before Michael and I met, actually, I think.
Yeah.
And so that goes over 40 years ago. So regardless, I was in New York, and the director Lieberman had a movie, Don Giovanni, the opera Don Giovanni, which he had made into a movie. And they were playing it at the Paris, what was the name?
Paris Theater.
The Paris Theater, which is
Okay.
corner from the Plaza
Right on 59th.
on 59th Street. So I and Larry went to the matinee performance, and we're sitting down waiting for this to start. Larry is at the aisle. I'm sitting next to him. There's a seat that is, no, it was one seat.
I thought it was a couple
No,
seats.
one seat was empty, and then there was a woman and a man sitting there. And he says to me, don't look now, but Jackie O is sitting next to you. And I said, who? And he says, Jacqueline Onassis. So naturally, what I did is the usual. I'm looking up at the ceiling and I'm going like this, and I'm going like that, gradually looking around, and then to see, looking, and there she was. And she was wearing a beautiful camel colored suit, cashmere, with sort of bone, a necklace made out of small bits of either rhinoceros or some kind of bony
Ivory.
animal bone, ivory, but actually
Ivory.
rhinoceros would have been more valuable. But that said, and then there was an elderly gentleman, a very distinguished elderly gentleman sitting next to her. So I don't know who that was.
The
Was
diamond.
probably the walker. What's his name? Jerry.
Could be, yes.
I'll think of it in a bit.
Anyway,
Oh,
that was
one.
that. The lights went out. We watched the movie. There was an intermission.
Who was Jacqueline Kennedy's?
She got up with
friend
her friend and
towards
went
the end
out
of
to
her
the
life?
lobby and was there talking to him. And everybody got up and went out to the lobby. No one bothered her. Not one person went up to her.
That's nice.
I once
Maurice,
walked up.
Maurice Templesman.
Yes.
No,
Maurice.
that's who she married.
No,
did-
she didn't marry him.
Didn't marry him.
No. Companion.
Yeah, but he wasn't a walker. There was a famous guy in New York.
Anyway, it might have been him though.
I like that expression, a walker. I don't know that I've ever heard that before.
These were the men who were the escorts.
I
of
get
the-
it. I know it. I figuring it out from context, but
She was
But
like,
Who was Jackie Kennedy's?
But a
I
walker.
once walked up the aisle behind Paul Newman.
oh my
And
God.
I wasn't about to break space or disturb him, but whoever cut his hair did it perfectly. I was entranced because there wasn't a hair that wasn't perfectly done.
just like all of us.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I have a story in the opposite direction, totally unfamous, but this happened in Chicago. So about 3 or 4 years ago, and you can laugh, don't do an awkward laugh. You can just openly laugh at this. And Richard and I, we had gone with Ankur, my husband, to some Cubs game. And so during Cubs game, they block off the Wrigley area because they don't allow cars to come, especially Ubers or Lyfts. So I had a small little Toyota Prius because it's easy to park everywhere, especially the way I park, you can go anywhere. So we picked up on the way back from the game, we gave Diane and Richard a ride. So, okay, my husband always says, let me get the car because it's easier. So he went to get the car. And so then I said, I'll meet you in about 5-10 minutes. So in 5-10 minutes, Richard, Diane, and I went to the car. There's my husband screaming bloody murder with the parking lot attendant. And my husband has a temper. And there he is taking out his ID. He's like, no, I am not an Uber driver. Do you know what happened?
Oh,
Because Diane and Richard is sitting in the back. Here are two brown people sitting in the front. So of course the parking lot people thought we were Uber drivers, giving them a ride home. So funny. Diane and them, they were horrified by it. I just thought it was so funny. It's the exact opposite of not being recognized. I love that. He laughed the whole thing. He was furious. How dare you pull an Uber out here? You can't blame the guy. A tiny little white Toyota Prius. It looks like an Uber driver. So it was funny.
but there are ways to address that. And many, many, many years ago in South Africa at Vic Falls, which is a very old Edwardian hotel, and you can picture ladies in their long white summer dresses. It has been picked up from history and is still what it was in the early 1900s. And I am entranced by the history that's on the walls. And I'm looking at pictures and loving it. And a porter walks up to me with something written and framed and presents it to me. And that was the explanation of why I had to leave that room because I was not staying at the hotel and therefore shouldn't be in that room. It was so elegantly done. I was entranced.
Wow.
Framed statement, so he didn't have to actually speak to or engage.
Exactly.
Interesting. Wow.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
No, but it was probably from 1912. And that's how you dealt with unpleasantness. Or they didn't really have tourists in those days. They had elegant guests. So the rest of us 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in our safari kit, did not meet those standards and were a dead tip-off. I wasn't wearing white or gloves or the hat. So, and I just was entranced with it because it prevented person-to-person potential unpleasantness.
I was crossing Via Veneto once. It was summertime.
That's a great start for a story.
Yes.
Right.
I love it.
This is true. This is a true story. It was summertime, and summer is a long season in Rome. And I would baste myself in baby oil. And I was absolutely black. And I loved it. And I'm thinking of your story, Shoma. I'm loving the way I feel and the way I look being black. And I'm crossing the street, and a woman comes running up to me and pulls my sleeve, and she says, "May I have your autograph?" And I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "Well, aren't you Lola Falana?"
Ah,
And I said, took her book and I signed Lola Falana. I didn't want to embarrass.
ah, ah.
I have pictures like that. I was a different human being.
That was very naughty.
Why? Otherwise, she'd be embarrassed.
I understand it. I can see
She
now.
didn't want to disappoint her.
She's meeting with her friends on a Sunday afternoon, talking about
In a
the same
Zoom group, right?
she met. And there you are in the middle of the story. Good
Next
for you.
time shake your hand and say, "What is it, Michael?" Everybody tells me that, or that's what everybody,
Right,
what,
yeah, people like
right.
to
So many people tell me that, yeah.
how many people tell me that?
Yes, yes.
I gotta go, kiddos.
Ah.
This was
Yeah.
fun. This was fun. Great idea, Barbara.
Love you all. Okay, nothing next week. And everybody will get me
Shana
names.
Tova to everybody.
Yes.
And
Hi,
safe
Tova.
That's
Safe
right.
travels to everybody and good health. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Right. Love you.
Bye all.
Ciao,
Bye
Tutti.
bye.
Ciao.